So we've been talking about doing some kind of video project for a while, and I'd been giving it a lot of thought, and I was in my kitchen one night just making toast, and I had genuinely what I just assumed was this lightning bolt moment where I thought, what if it was like a visual record, like an album that you watched instead of listened to? And I texted a couple of my friends the next day to kind of sound it out, and everyone was like, yeah, okay, cool, yeah. And then about 3 weeks before we were due to film it, I saw that Beyonce was releasing a visual record on Disney+. I was so gutted. I was like, what are the chances of that? I had this great idea and Beyonce's stolen it. She's going to beat me to the punch. I texted my friend. I was like, can you believe this? Beyonce's stolen my idea. And he said, yeah, well, to be fair, Stu, she did release Lemonade in 2016. And I was like, oh yeah, kind of forgot about that. It's not like she snuck it out, you know, it was a pretty significant moment for pop culture. She played songs from it at the Super Bowl, wasn't a secret. I went from feeling like this great innovator who'd had this great light bulb moment to basically just feeling like an idiot. But it was quite good in a way. And it taught me two things. That firstly, if you're going to do something as self-indulgent as this, you should probably try and stay humble. And secondly, whatever your best idea, Beyonce's almost certainly had it first. I'll be so surprised if there's anyone committing to watching this that doesn't know me, but in the interest of making formalities, my name is Stuart, I live in Glasgow and I'm a musician. I always felt like a wee bit of a fraud saying that, because in spite of playing in bands for over 10 years, I really am a bang average musician whose special move is staring blankly when someone asks me what key a song is in. A lifetime ago I played in an indie pop band called French Wives. If you're from Glasgow and if you set foot in the Captain's Rest between 2008 and 2013, then there's a chance you'll have heard of us. We did a lot of toilet tours of the UK and we played at South by Southwest once, which I'll be quick to bring up as a perceived yardstick of success to the uninitiated. blissfully ignorant that our experience there was akin to a government-sanctioned holiday to a musician's Magaluf. We landed a big sink on a tween-age drama about Mary Queen of Scots the month that the band split up, so one of our songs has an unfathomable amount of streams and emotional YouTube comments that somewhat belie our popularity at the time, but does still afford the occasional trickle-down of £20 PRS payments here and there, so you can't really grumble some 7 years on. We never really achieved what I thought we were going to. I'd like to think probably what some other folk thought we might too. I suppose that perception is entirely in the eye of the beholder though, and maybe we achieved exactly what we deserved. 5 fun years and a MySpace message from the Mystery Jets. When French Wives petered out, I dusted myself off quickly and took to writing songs with my friend Gordon in his bedroom for about 2 years. We launched a project called Smash Williams that excited a small corner of the internet for about 10 minutes in 2016. I think perhaps naively, in fact, no perhaps about it, I very definitely, naively thought we were off to the races with that one. I felt like I'd worked a lot harder on the songs this time, or that having served some great musical apprenticeship, I was finally going to be rewarded for sticking at it when others would have sacked it off. I had this great focus and felt for sure vindication was coming. Success was coming. What even is success? Being a musician for a living? Making a lot of money? That's unlikely. Touring all over the world, playing at the world famous Barrowland Ballroom? I don't know. And it's weird that I can't really measure what that is, considering it's something I was belligerently chasing down and working towards for most of my 20s to seemingly no avail. After about a year and a handful of shows with Smash Williams, ranging from Getting Better to the one you have in the nightmare where everything goes wrong, it all kind of petered out again. Deja vu. What to do with myself? The week before I was due to move into my first flat with my mate Guy, we had a party. I hadn't moved anything into my room, so it was pretty much empty save for a bed and a big white duvet with no cover. I crashed at the flat and bleary-eyed got up to check how he was bearing up in the face of a skull-crushing hangover. I wrapped myself head to toe in my big white duvet and staggered through to his room. Swimming through the stench of booze, I tried to summon him. Half asleep, and definitely still drunk, he said, so dramatically, "Have you come to vanquish me, Quilter?" The implication being, if memory serves, that I was some kind of super villain that had the power to control any and all duvet or duvet-esque materials. It became this very obscure, very niche joke between friends, and when I needed a niche, obscure moniker for a new music project, it felt appropriate as what, after all, is a band name if not a niche and obscure moniker. The Quilter is essentially a solo project in that I've written all the songs and played all the parts, but it gets blurry in that it sounds like a big band, and I think that's how I'd prefer it to be perceived. Also, I say I played all the parts, and that's simply not true, as my drumming ability topped out at standard grade level, but I've been blessed with a Spinal Tap-esque litany of great drummers who've contributed along the way. The rest is true though, that is exactly how Guy Cody sounds, and I did write all the parts. It's a strange adjustment working on your own, because whilst you have all this freedom to do what you want and you can work at your own pace, you're also at the mercy of your own enthusiasm and you're as responsible for all the bad ideas as the good. When the buck stops with you, it's important to try and come to terms with this fact quickly. I must confess that I do miss the camaraderie of being in a more conventional band. I miss the feeling of being in your own wee gang, sharing the highs and lows. It's quite a unique bond to form with people. It's a scary business getting up and playing songs to people. It breeds confidence sharing that experience with others. I'm fortunate that I still get to dip into that feeling playing these songs live, and whether it's the folk here today or the folk that I've played previously and I'm sure will again, I'm lucky to have found such a talented group of musicians who are willing to get involved. It's felt touch and go whether we'd ever get to do it again recently, and more than anything, it's just nice to be out the house. I know it's not a groundbreaking statement to say that these are strange and unprecedented times we're living through, but you can't really escape that feeling. Everyone's plans have changed and we've all had to pivot. It's so daunting thinking about how you proceed. How can you keep moving forward? Personally speaking, I know I've asked myself, in the face of a global pandemic and an unprecedented civil rights movement, do people really need to hear about me punting songs I wrote in my bedroom? When everything slowed or stopped, do you slow down with it, or do you try and find a different path through it all? Maybe people need music and escapism more than ever. Maybe you've got to best see this as a chance to reset or reevaluate what's important. I doubt I'd be making this if it wasn't for the pandemic. It's not like folk were beating down my door to book me for shows, so in many ways being challenged into presenting your work in a different way could be classed as an opportunity. Maybe down the line a post-COVID world will bring around a fairer and more compassionate society. Who knows? There has to be some good to come from it. There are always lessons to be learned in adversity. It's hard not to get weighed down by it all though. It's hard not to feel isolated or low, to feel helpless, rudderless, to lose that little bit of drive or purpose. It puts things into perspective. The things we took for granted, the freedom to make plans, the physical touch, meeting a stranger or dancing with your friends. My God, do you remember risk-free, careless abandon dancing with your friends? Individually and collectively we've been fair put through the ringer of late. For all that we've lost, there'll be much to take from it though. There are always lessons to be learned in adversity. Well, you only ever really hear about people that make it to the top. You sort of hear about their struggles and how they overcame them and how they succeeded and how they achieved. We don't tend to hear so much of the stories of people that really tried and for one reason or another just didn't quite happen.
I wrote your name in lowercase letters, burned in my brain and made me feel better.
People who had every intention of achieving great things and it's never quite happened, and what does that do to a person, or what does that process look like?
Till you came and closed the door.
The process of failure or the process of coming up short.
One day I'll tell you everything about. One day I'll tell you everything. Every step we staggered home, from my flesh down to my bone. You would have placed where me home.
I look at a lot of my friends and a lot of my peers that have done these things that I wanted to do and that I've never quite been able to do, and that's always just been a wee bit disappointing. sometimes that's just the way the cookie crumbles as well. So it is what it is. I often wonder about how much people pay attention to lyrics. I love lyrics, but on a cursory listen, are people really picking up on what a song is about, or what function it's serving the writer? Of course they don't have to be. Music, like all art, is completely subjective, and folk can take from it what they want. I guess I think about that because if they are, then that really does leave you very exposed and vulnerable, and I think that's something I've always taken for granted when writing songs. And it's weird when you think about it, because no one's making you do it. No one's making me do this, but I've decided it's what I'm going to do. It's some inherent, bizarre coping mechanism or desire. It doesn't really matter what I say or how I say it, and there's not really any right or wrong way to do it. I could write about my experiences and tell stories in the most eloquent way possible until I'm blue in the face, and someone somewhere will still shrug their shoulders and say, "That's not for me." So if you'll never be able to please everyone, why worry so much about pleasing anyone? All you can be is honest. Brutally honest. People appreciate brutal honesty. I think I'm more conscious of that vulnerability with these songs in particular because I sometimes wonder, do people already know? It's not healthy to wallow in hardships and adversities of the past, but if they have happened, then they do exist. In all shapes and sizes, in all scales and measurements. It's both unique and universal. You can choose to live in them, or you can choose to learn from them. Sometimes they can prove to be an unlikely catalyst. If not for you, then maybe for someone else. Often they are a part of the story, but sometimes they are the story. It's difficult to talk about, and it's probably uncomfortable to listen to, but I feel unburdened by the exploration and this catharsis and sharing. I try to be open about it in the hope that others can be open about it too. I'm very aware that I'm not alone in having felt this way, and I don't feel weak, I don't feel ashamed, and I don't feel any less for having endured something like this. Towards the end of the Smash Williams stuff, I started to feel increasingly low. I think there was a number of factors at play, and that perhaps it's something that had been in the post for a while, but when that project didn't work out, I started to feel really lost. I think over the course of so many years of doing it, being in a band had accidentally become this massive part of my identity. It wasn't my intention, and I didn't even notice it at the time, but for the most part, when I would meet people, often their second or third question after how I was doing would be, "How's the band going?" It's a pretty dangerous trap to fall into where your own perceived successes and failures of a creative outlet marry so closely to your perception of your successes and failures as an individual. I always really tried with those bands, and I always felt like I was just coming up short. I could never quite figure it out, and I felt bad as so many people had been so supportive of me over the years. Like they deserved a big payoff as much as I did, and perhaps I was letting them down in some way. Things don't always play out how you think they will. Sometimes it's hard to see why at the time. Not becoming some kind of international rock star was not at the root of my troubles, but I do think in this instance, another creative project that I put so much into running aground was the straw that broke the camel's back. I playfully refer to it as a lost year, but in reality that is mere bubble wrap to the fact that I endured a prolonged period of serious depression and crippling anxiety. I was having frequent debilitating panic attacks. I struggled to get out of bed, and for the most part was in this strange state of very knowing denial about the whole thing. When I've made people aware of this long after the fact, often they are apologetic that they didn't do more at the time, or that they somehow failed me, but nothing could be further from the truth. It was something I kept very close to my chest, and didn't really tell any family or friends about, and had anyone questioned me, I would have almost certainly batted them off under the contention I was completely fine. I had an excellent poker face and spent so much of my time pretending to be a version of myself as I slipped further and further away from what that actually was. Everything began to pass me by to the point where I was no longer an active participant in my own life. It was bleak. It was scary. It was uncertain. And it was lonely.
There's no peace for me. I will live in a state of nostalgic purgatory. There's no hope inside. Life was so easy, now I'm just staying alive. And now and then I feel born again. Every day is a day I'll try. And slowly when I count to 10, comes a day when it's all behind me. How's your summer been? I swam island to island, something still eats at me. And passing time, you're a friend of mine. Every day is a day I try. And I can dream of a closing screen and a day when it's all behind me. You are bold and you are brilliant. Hurts forever, thanks a million. Maybe if you try much harder, put anyone first besides you, I'm sure that I made mistakes. No regrets, and them's the breaks. Ask yourself and please be honest. Can you say the same and promise no?
It feels a bit like being stuck in slow motion. Like you're sinking in quicksand, but you don't really have the energy to struggle against it. There was a lot of staring at walls, staring at ceilings, standing in showers, quietly drifting off. I essentially gave up on the idea of making music. I bought everything you would ever need to make music and start again if I wanted to, but I'd checked out. I think it was part of this veil I had created, like it would seem suspicious if I wasn't talking about a music project or being seen to actively try and create something. If I could ever kid myself on enough to sit down and do some work, I could muster about 10 minutes of concentration before giving up. I was in what I'll respectfully describe with hindsight as an unhealthy relationship at the time, which didn't help matters, and whilst its last few months played out like a funeral procession, I really felt like I was losing all of these constants in my life. I took solace in things that could distract my weary brain. I spent a lot of time playing mindless computer games where I could lose hours in relative comfort because at least none of that was real. I got really into watching MMA and started listening to this podcast called the MMA Hour, hosted by a guy called Ariel Helwani. He's sort of like the MMA equivalent to Gary Lineker. Contrary to its name, it would last 4 or 5 hours, so I would break it up and it would act as a little island of relief to swim to, or something I could listen to at night to help me off to sleep. By the end of 2017, it had been easily over a year since I'd last written a song. Songwriting had always been this great companion of mine, and it was now just gone. I had amassed a series of small, largely awful beginnings or half-baked ideas from those occasional 10-minute stints, but there was nothing in them, and I was pretty convinced that I just couldn't do it anymore. There was one afternoon, it must have been in November. I can still picture it so clearly, as I was almost catatonic slumped at my desk, forehead pressed against the tabletop with barely the energy to reach over to my keyboard. I had this really simple ambient progression that I'd mustered some weeks earlier. I decided I was going to try and write a stream of consciousness vocal, if for no other reason than it might prove therapeutic. I muttered and mumbled whatever came to mind and recorded a verse, safe in the knowledge that I would just delete it or go back and change it for something better if it suddenly jolted some inspiration. It was really basic, and as a fan of dexterous vocabulary, I wasn't too impressed. But if nothing else, it came from a very genuine place. As I sat in the aftermath of having at least done something for the day, after about half an hour, from literally nowhere, a new line popped into my head. Only the best not over my shoulder, only the end when I say it's over. I thought to myself, what is that? I had this familiar but foggy feeling of what it is like to stumble upon an idea you think you can explore. For a brief moment I was able to extrapolate in ways that I used to, and I imagined how that line would fit in a hypothetical song, how it would look and sound and feel to hypothetically sing it. I didn't spring up from my desk like some Disney cartoon and suddenly I was fixed, but it was like a tiny crack of light had broken through in the distance. If I could just find a way to regain control of my situation, there could be hope that it didn't have to be this way. I never did go back and change the words in that verse.
The way I was, the way it's meant to be, the way I am, the way that's meant for
It's not easy digging yourself out of a hole. Progress is key. Victories are key. Even if they're small, even if you barely notice them. It generates forward momentum. I'm not sure what prompted this defiant streak in me or where the first tiny crack of light was sent from, but they kept on coming. Marginal gains. 10 minutes kidding myself on became 30 minutes actively trying. Awful half-baked ideas became awful half-baked songs. And then awful half-baked songs became good ideas, and the good ideas became half-finished songs. And so on, and so on. I sought help professionally, but more importantly I sought to help myself. I was sick of being sick and frustrated that I'd allowed so much time to pass. My relationship ended, and whilst that's very sad, I didn't allow it to halt my progress. I wanted to challenge myself, I wanted to get better, and I wanted to push outside my comfort zone. I booked a trip to New York to see my friend Martin, who was living there at the time. That might not sound like a big deal, but international solo travel was completely out of the question given a ride on the Glasgow subway had established itself as a panic-ridden ordeal. But I needed to try and feel more comfortable in uncomfortable situations. I needed to provide myself with the anecdotal evidence that I could do regular things and start to feel like myself again. So in April, I went. And it was transformative. Obviously it's not hard to have a good time in New York, but I just felt so liberated from this toxic siege I'd been living under. I spent a few days of my own exploring, hanging out, talking to strangers, and slowly proving to myself that things didn't have to be the way they'd been. I even met Ariel Helwani. He was covering a public press conference for an event happening in Brooklyn, so I went along. It's quite embarrassing, but I waited outside and got a photo with him. It's not something I'd ordinarily do, and I feel I should assure him more than anyone else that I'm not some crazed superfan. I just wanted to shake his hand as a sort of thanks. He'd been an unlikely source of support for me, and it was a nice way to prove to myself that the world was a lot smaller than I'd made it out in my head for so long. I liked the symbolism of it all. A seemingly innocuous moment, but the man on the end of the podcast I listened to as I struggled was now just a man I was standing beside on the street as I worked my way back. I'm also pleased to report he's a really nice bloke. He has a Quilter poster and we've exchanged messages a few times. A real mensch. Things were different when I came home. I was different. I felt a determination and a drive to make up for lost time. More than anything, I had a desire to create and make music again. I didn't know what that was going to be, how it was going to sound, or what it was going to look like. I didn't want to make music because I needed to go and tour the world or because it had to be my career. I wanted to do it because I loved it and I'd missed it. I needed to prove to myself that I could still do it if I wanted to. And if that I could still do it, I would do it now before the opportunity to do so was taken away. It was a long and challenging process, and it wasn't always smooth sailing, but I'd learned a lot. I'd learned how to help myself and how to ask for help. I'm aware that I'm incredibly fortunate to be surrounded by different communities of great friends and a supportive family that I know I can turn to, and I don't take that for granted. I remember one time I was very drunk after a wedding and something had upset me, so I texted Guy and told him about it. He replied, "I'll spare you the impression this time. Stu, there's been a marked improvement from you. You're too bold, you're too sharp, you're too bright. Everything's going to be fine." I think he was very drunk at the time too, but still, you have to count yourself very lucky to have someone like that in your corner.
Nobody's leaving you, everyone's staying alive. I've got a purpose, so I've got a reason to thrive. Thanks for the memories, the mystery, the mentoring thoughts. Send me to sleep, Ariel, I've been
These songs are so important to me. I love them so much, and I'm completely aware that that doesn't entitle me to have everyone else love them too. But there was a time when they felt impossible. The fact that they even exist from where I was that day with my head pressed against the table is wild to me. I proved to myself that if I want to, I can still enjoy making music, and whether that's for 10 people to hear or 10,000, ultimately I'm doing it for myself. The songs are more than an exploration of a dark time. They're a roadmap for me, a memento of how it was, and a tool I can use should I ever need a tangible reminder to not allow myself to fall so far. Maybe they can serve as a reminder for someone else. They've led me to fully appreciate making art for art's sake. They were direction and a sense of purpose when for so long I'd been overcome with purposelessness. They are a catalyst for whatever's next, an opportunity for me to go and do things that I'd cut myself off from for so long. In all likelihood, they won't bring me fame and fortune. I may not tour internationally, and as disappointing as it would be, I may never play at the world-famous Barrowland Ballroom, but I don't think that these things are my measurement for success anymore. Just being able to do it at all feels pretty triumphant to me right now. It probably sounds obvious, but I think that aiming to be content and enjoy the process more is where real success lies. I'm sure Beyoncé's already thought of that.